Welcome everyone back to the Economancer, which at some point in time I'm going to have to change my name to the Communimancer. So today we're going to be going over the three basic transmission models of communication. And what this entails is that when we're having a conversation or you're talking to someone, there is either a one-way or a two-way street in that conversation and how that plays out. These are the simple, most basic ways of looking at communication, and each one gets more and more complex as you go through. So we're going to just name them. They're going to be the linear, interaction, and transactional model of communications. So obviously the linear model is going to be the most simplest, and the transactional model is going to be the most complex. Later down the line, we're going to be looking through these. And again, we're also going to be thinking about these within context to our prior conversations, which is really key to this. So we're going to start off with the linear model. All right, so as normal, we're going to have a sender. And there we have here, this is our channel. That's the channel of communication. At some point in time, we're going to have some noise over here. All right, so we've got some noise, and then we have our receiver. Right, and so it's pretty clear to see that this is a one-way process. And what that means is the sender is just giving out the information. It comes to this point right here. We're going to encode. It's really not even needed to be encoded. That's a terrible E. And then here, when it gets to the receiver, they're going to decode the message. All right, so that is the most basic way to think about this. And the reason why this is so basic is because there's no interaction between these two elements. There is just the sender, the receiver, one-way transmission with a channel. All right, so the next one we're going to be going at, make sure you take a picture. The next one we're going to be looking at is the interaction model. And this is where it gets a little bit crazy. So we start with our sender. We're going to go over here. We're going to have our receiver. All right. Then we're going to have forward loop. Yay. Then we're going to have the back loop. Yay. All right. Then we're going to have the channel. All right. And then in that, we're going to have little spots here, here, here. Then we're going to have noise, which is going to be in the channel. And remember, this is channel. And then this is going to be feedback loop. Wow. Hold on. All right. Here we go. Where are we at? There we are. Come on. I never thought feedback was going to be so hard to spell. All right, so that's feedback loop. And then here is feedback. All right, now in this, we're going to have decode on this side for this person. And then they're going to have encode. And then over here, we're going to have encode. And then decode. All right, so what's going on here? All right, so we have one message that's getting sent. We're going to also add it here. We've got one message. All right, this message goes forward from sender to receiver. All right. And with that message, it goes to the receiver. The receiver decodes the message at this point and then provides feedback. Now, when they provide feedback, they're sending a signal. That signal is getting encoded, goes over here, then it gets decoded by the sender, and then there's more feedback on top of that. And so what this tells us is that there is a situation in which there's a two-way conversation where there's an encoding of the message, a decoding of the message by both the sender and the receiver. There's noise in there that kind of complicates what's being said. And then the only thing that really matters here is that everything is in the code that's being discussed. So this is again, pretty simple. And this is the way we think most conversations are. But the thing is that's probably not always the case. And the reason why I say this, and this is pretty simple, you can be someone on the far left and on the far right and set them down and to try to have a conversation. All right. The initial message, when it gets decoded, doesn't really make much sense. And the feedback loops, they don't clarify anything either. They just become really annoying diatribes of one person saying one thing and another person interpreting it their own way, so on and so forth, because there's not a code that both of them are able to understand and apply evenly. And so that creates way more noise. All right, now here comes the most important, and that is the transactional model. All right, and this one doesn't start with a sender or receiver. This one actually starts with a box in the middle. Some places consider this a black box, but what we're going to say is that it's a co-creation of meaning. All right, now this is multi-directional. What that means is we have this, we have this, we have this, and then we have this. And now we have our sender and our receiver. But hearkening back to what I said last episode, we have this idea of meaning as this shared value construct of when you and I talk, we have the same code, and then we have this information, and what we agree on or what I can infer or take away from what you're saying, that information that makes a difference, that is informative, is the creation of meaning. Now, what this says is that it's a co-creation of meaning. So everything that I say to you pretty much is pointless unless you understand and or you create your own meaning from it. And so we're both creating meaning through this conversation, this deep meaning. All right, and so in that we have contexts. So we have the material and, that's my and, psychic. Now, this doesn't mean psychic like I'm a medium or something. This is just what's referred to as the psychic system for psychology or the psyche. All right, then we have cultural. Now, you would think that that would be in the material and psychic, but it's not. And the reason it's not is because cultural is a set of norms, values, and habits that cohabitate the material and psychic and create constraints on them. All right, and then down here we have relational. And this is how you relate to the material. How does it impact what's going on with you? Because I could say something to you that's extremely informative and it wouldn't have any meaning because it's not relational to you. It doesn't matter. Like someone who's going to watch this video and doesn't care about this, there's no meaning imported by this because it's just pointless for them. And so that's something to think about. And then last is social. Now, why is social not the same as cultural? Well, cultural gives you your norms and your habits. Social is another word for a hierarchy. Whenever we think of society, we think of a hierarchical structure of interdependent pieces, people, and things of that nature, right? So culture is a subset within a total subset, which is society. So it's a subsystem within the totality of the system. And so what we have here is we have a sender and a receiver having a conversation. And the co-creation of the meaning comes from these four paths. And you could probably have more. There's probably something that you could do from field theory from Pierre Bourdieu that would interact with this on capital exchanges and stuff like that. But ultimately, what it's saying is, all right, so when we have a context of the social, right? So how you talk to your boss is going to be a part of how you create the meaning from the conversation, the material and psychic context. So someone's richer than you or poorer than you, which is also associated with the social, but it could also be race, ethnicity, which is also associated with culture. And psychic, you could be left-leaning, right-leaning, your personality disposition, things of that nature are going to have impacts on how this meaning is created. So if you're someone who's highly diligent, really high in conscientiousness, talking to someone with really low conscientiousness and really high openness to experience, the meanings and the values and stuff like that aren't necessarily shared, but the meaning that you're going to be gaining from what this person says may be slightly different. Cultural. I mean, this is kind of pretty easily to understand that cultural context of the meaning that you're bringing out is going to matter, because if I'm saying something to you as a Christian and you are, say, a Buddhist, we may agree on some of those basic tenets of like stoicism, for example, or overcoming adversity and understanding suffering and the existential dread of life, so on and so forth. I would say that there is this grand creator, all loving, all powerful God that interacts with me through this, and that is important to me, right? Whereas someone who's Buddhist could say it's my overcoming of that problem. A nihilist would have something like it's will to power, so on and so forth. And so that cultural context is something that's really important. And again, that feeds back into psychic, feeds back into the social, and feeds back into the relational, because all of these are essentially together in one aspect, but they can be broken down into individual pieces where you could match someone on social, material, and cultural, but you don't relate to the conversation as much. So that meaning is going to be a lot more void. Whereas you could have all of these four are completely at odds with each other, and then nothing of what you say is meaningful other than like bringing about anger or something. Or another way to think about it, if all four of these are very, very different, then there's probably a language barrier where you may not be able to have full-on conversation because you literally have no idea what the other person is saying. Now, why does this matter? Why does this transactional model like really impact our lives and the way we think about stuff? Well, first, if meaning is created in this process of communication where information is presented from each communicant and where the shared value or code, the meaning is created from these four things, this creates a question of, is there an equilibrium state between the sender and the receiver? So interestingly enough, Hayek, Mises, and others from the Austrian School of Economics found that what this is subjectivism and complexity. And this impairs us from actually being able to answer the statement about there being an equilibrium, which is why they have that argument in economics against equilibriums, because they've rejected this notion of Newtonian determinism, universal laws, etc. They propose that intersubjectivism is primary in meaning, which is the underlying process in economic decision making. So if you're looking at this transactional model of communication, we see that context of the information differs from person to person substantially. So basically, there's no point in trying to obtain an equilibrium state. But much like my previous videos, there's plenty of information to be gained. For example, the state where all the meaning in a conversation has been transferred would be the homeostatic conclusion, right? So assuming we have some statement and let's say you're discussing some political stance, some policy, right? So whether or not there should be, I'm trying to think of something that doesn't get me in trouble, because all policy talks are always difficult. Let's say, um, hmm, let's say child welfare, that someone should pay for a child. I think that's probably a fun one to discuss. So anyway, so we have multiple different takes on this where fathers should always pay, fathers should not always pay, that there's certain thresholds associated with it, and all of that. So you have two people with diametrically opposing ideas. The conversation can be very short because they're not going to come to a co-created meaning. But there is an equilibrium where all of the necessary information has been given, even though there's no meaning being created. And then you can think of someone who is very much ideologically the same as you. Y'all could agree on almost everything. There's still going to be some instance where there's not agreement, but all the information has been given out. And so at that point, you're at a homeostatic conclusion. That is the equilibrium. And so if communicant A and communicant B want to mutually discuss burgers, the communicants send and receive the information. There are innumerable stops along the way. If we go back to that previous model of feedback loops, so on and so forth, their tangents, reiterating their context, explaining their frame. But there does come a time when both participants are no longer sharing meaning. All that is happening is this sharing of garbled information that cannot be decoded. Thus, we have hidden information steady state, and without an exogenous shock of information, so a third party or opening up the internet or something like that, the information isn't going any further. So there's no meaning being enabled by this conversation anymore. So there's also the idea, and this is something that I'll be getting into later in the videos, is there's a depreciation of the initial share meaning. And so you can think of this way. Let's say you are discussing something with someone you know, and y'all aren't in full agreement with everything that's being stated. At some point in time, y'all will hit that impasse where you've said everything, you've given all the information, or prior to all the information, but all the meaning has been subsumed in the conversation, and you move past where you're no longer discussing meaning, you're just in transferring of information, and someone says something to you that is so bad that now you have to backtrack on the meaning that's been created, and that meaning is essentially destroyed. And so that information that was associated with that meaning is now being removed or depreciated by the person that you're talking to. And so there's something to be said about this idea that sometimes it's best to just shut up rather than digging a deeper and deeper hole. So I hope that made a lot of sense. And I hope everybody, wow, that's really crazy. And I hope everybody enjoyed that video. It's a bit longer than I expected, but I also think it's a good introduction to some of the most basic models for communications theory. And I am the Economancer. I hope you have a wonderful day.